WBB.
Genesis paper number 4, The Beginning of a Tyranny. 1. Terra Nova. Lord Enki was a master geneticist, perhaps the best in the Aryan Empire, trained directly under his mother, Queen Nkht. He had been on many planets that still hadn't developed any life forms, and was used to toxic atmospheres and rocky deserts. Perhaps 1 million Earth years, or more, had passed since the War of the Titans and the destruction of Terra, and now Enki, as a skilled scientist, was sent by his stepfather, King Anu, to explore the destroyed planet to see if anything could be rebuilt on it. Eventually, what was left of the giant planet Terra had been catapulted towards the sun due to the impact of the explosion, and one piece was relatively intact and had been taken up by the gravity from Mars and Venus and put itself in orbit around the sun, right between the two smaller planets. Terra, which once had been quite giant, was now only slightly bigger than Venus. The other part of the old Terra had become the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. But not only that. When Terra exploded, Mars' atmosphere was sucked out in space as well, and lots of people died there, too. All that was left was a thin atmosphere that no one could breathe. Contrary to Terra, Mars was never rebuilt and reseeded, but once things started taking off again on Terra, Mars was repopulated as well, but only by Syrians, who built a science and a military base under Mars' surface. We have learned from many good sources that Mars was used also for genetic experiments, which continued underground after the depletion of her atmosphere. A skeleton crew of Syrians and their helpers are supposedly still there up to this very day. Enki rarely traveled in the Syrians' hollowed-out craft, unless he traveled together with them. Now he was alone in a new solar system, and this was the first time he was on Terra. He had heard so many stories about how beautiful it used to be here, and about his mother's, the Queen, experiment with the living library and the creation of the Namluyu. Now, however, it all seemed to be gone. Terra was without atmosphere, and the trees, lakes, rivers, and oceans had been sucked out in space. Terra was a barren planet. Enki nano-traveled to Terra and could quickly browse the whole planet from a soul perspective and thus get a pretty good picture of how bad it was and what needed to be done. If he had had a body, he would have sighed. It would take time to rebuild this planet, but it was definitely possible. First thing he needed to do was to recreate the atmosphere and the magnetic field around the planet. Gone was the living library and all that came with it. Enki could not build such a thing on his own, or together with his scientific team. It required participation of thousands upon thousands of evolved planets, although he knew, of course, how to seed plants and animals, and also how to create higher intelligent life forms. However, his mission was to first rebuild Terra so it could become inhabitable again. The Khanur wanted his gold and minerals, and to be able for the Syrian workers to descend to the planet, they needed a world with an atmosphere, and this required plant and animal life to create an ecosystem and a sustainable atmosphere. And the Enki needed quartz in great quantities in order to create intelligent life. It was needed for the artificial wombs. After he had eventually rebuilt the atmosphere and the magnetic field, Enki led founders from near and far direct asteroids and comets towards Terra, asteroids which included specific DNA that would help recreating the life forms on the planet, and for a while the atmosphere was bombarded with space rocks. Enki selected a team of scientists and they settled down in an area of the planet that is today the eastern part of Siberia and started building laboratories high up on a mountain, where the earth met the sky, where there was a big lake. Here was where intelligent life was going to be seeded once the reconstruction of Terra allowed it. This was where the most powerful lightning storms occurred in the beginning of time. Normally, a seeding process that could take millions, sometimes billions of years, the king wanted to be completed as fast as possible. Enki's task was to accomplish that. After Terra was destroyed, the king had lost a lot of income from his mining projects. He knew it was not going to be as lucrative as it used to be with a big chunk of the planet torn to pieces, but if he was lucky, there was still a lot of resources to dig up. So Enki did what he could to speed up the panspermia process, and soon there was thunder and lightning in the air all over the planet, igniting the seeds of life, and the first rain started. The rains became heavier and heavier and oceans started filling up. Enki and his team left the planet for a while to let everything have its time to develop. When Enki and his scientists came back, they planted forests all over the world to help with building oxygen, and Mother Terra could start breathing with her own lungs again. Life was eventually developing in the oceans, and land animals started to reappear. Terra was slowly being revived. Enki had reconstructed Terra in record time, and Terra Nova, the new Terra, was born. Some say that the word Earth is actually a name honoring Enki, whose title later changed to Ea, the god of sweet waters, thus Earth. If this is true or not is open for discussion, but this is probably a good time for me to change the name of our planet in my own story from Terra to Earth or Terra Nova, in an interchangeable fashion. In addition, ENKI had genetically engineered tall and strong reptilian bodies, which he had put in storage in big tanks on Mars, where they were kept in a dormant state. They were waiting to be transferred to Nova Terra to remain hidden in underground caverns, put away and locked into a frequency slightly above the 3D density which held the Earth's signature. This way, the bodies would not be found by anybody, except by those they were meant for and had the frequency keys. When the Syrians arrived with their hollowed-out craft, surfing the KHAA, they would have perfect bodies they could use for their 3D experience waiting for them, bodies that had been tested elsewhere on other planets the Syrians had conquered. Hence, these reptilian vessels were familiar to them. The king was very pleased and gave ENKI his title, Lord of Earth. The planet was again full of life forms, but there was no living library anymore, and the Namlu shepherds were gone. ENKI took a long vacation and returned to the stars and didn't come back in a few thousand years. Earth needed to adjust to the quick reconstruction, and different plants and animals needed to be able to be synchronized into this young ecological system. When he came back, everything was working just the way he had planned. Other creator gods were here when he returned. The vegans had experimented with their own genes, created monkeys and apes which now contained their own genes, and even some Padistu, deaf, from worlds in Orion and Ursa Major and Minor were here, experimenting with the new fauna and flora, and these creator gods, just like the vegans, had added species to the ecosystem. ENKI recognized them from the stars, because some of them manifested in their true form, while others must have formed their own bases somewhere in the solar system where they had their own laboratories, including bodies as storage, just like ENKI had. Some were reptilians, others amphibian, and humanoid species were here as well, such as the vegans, Zero. ENKI didn't mind this, and the Padistu races knew to stay away from the Syrians when they arrived. Finally the day came when ENKI returned to Sirius and informed the king that he could send over people to mine on Earth again. The atmosphere should now be just right, and the frequency of the planet sufficient to house Syrian workers. 2. ENKI's encounter in the forest. Soon enough, the Syrian ships started appearing around Earth, and their domestic aircraft descended down on the planet. The expedition was led by Lord Enlil, Lord of the Airways, but he was also titled Lord of Command, being the commander of the mining project and basically in charge of the whole project ARIDU, except for the scientific part, which was been given to ENKI, who had to give power away to his stepbrother, something he found unfair, but nothing he could do much about. After all, he was Aryan and not Syrian. Enlil couldn't believe what his brother had managed to do. This new planet was almost as beautiful and also quite identical with the old Terra, although so much smaller. The atmosphere was perfect for the giant reptilian bodies they reanimated, the temperature warmer than it used to be, which was appreciated, but ENKI said there would eventually be ice ages. It was inevitable. For once, the two brothers were on the same page, and Enlil greeted his brother with respect for what he'd accomplished. They celebrated and got drunk in ENKI's residence, and the party lasted for quite a few days, until Enlil finally told his men that it was time to start working. More miners were on their way from Sirius. Figure 4-1. Lord Enlil, Prince of Sirius, the way he was depicted in Sumerian cuneiforms, at that time inhabiting a more human-like body, as we shall learn. As soon as Enlil got a chance to settle down on Earth, he started building the grid system and sealed off the stargates that led into and out from Earth. He also changed the frequency of the planet so it became invisible for other star beings who might want to come and explore. Lord Enlil thus had the sole power to decide who could enter and who could leave the planet. Well, almost. The grid, which was meant to keep star being out, was not perfect and had holes in it. However hard they tried, they could not seal Earth 100%. Lord ENKI, the Aryan master geneticist, working with his father's crew, had done a great job, but not great enough. There was no living library. Hence, to both Lord ENKI's, Lord Enlil's, and everybody else's surprise, new plants and animal species started showing up on Earth, seemingly from nowhere. Still, he was thrilled over what was being done by creator gods more skilled than him. He saw plants he'd only heard of before, and he ate them. Soon enough, he was taken into another state of consciousness, which he otherwise only could reach outside 3D reality. Rabbits with long ears hopped around outside his cabin, and he started setting out traps to catch them, because he would assume they tasted good. When he saw the apes, they caught his interest, and the scientist in him came to life. These could be genetically manipulated, he thought, to create an even more intelligent species. Some of them were just animals, but the vegans had been there while he was gone and had mixed their own genes with the big apes and managed to come up with Homo neanderthalensis and Homo erectus, none of them too clever, but the first smarter than the second. The vegans had never been able to complete their experiment, however, and left it unfinished, and the hominid apes were running free on the planet. Homo erectus was quite a bit taller than modern man, while Homo neanderthalensis was slightly shorter. ENKI's dream had always been to create an intelligent star being which had the fire of the mother goddess in them, the way his mother had taught him when he was younger. She had done it with an Amlu, and to become a master geneticist of rank, he felt he needed to accomplish at least that. This was what he often sat and dreamed about on his porch outside his cabin, getting drunk on spirits. Lord Enki was quite pleased with the results he'd accomplished so far, but he had still been too young to contribute to the Namluyu experiment, millions of years ago. By the time the War of the Titans was over, he and his half-sister, Ninhursh8G, generally called Nin or Ninki, were both graduated master geneticists. This means they were both founders and could build worlds from the tiniest one-cell amoebas to highly intelligent dog races. Lord Enki was later being called Prince E here on Earth, and the prince he was. However, Prince E was never going to inherit neither the kingdom of Sirius nor the queendom of Orion. To his own dismay, the Syrian throne was reserved for Prince Enlil, who had pure Syrian blood and was a real son of the king. And in Orion, a male did never inherit the throne. His stepsister, whom he loved dearly, could of course not inherit any throne either, although she was a princess, daughter of King Anu, as it were. Only males sat on the Syrian, or any other Syrian-dominated throne. By the time Enki arrived on Terra, Nin was both Enki's stepsister and consort. The Queen of the Stars had great plans for her talented son and was hoping he would work with her in creating new worlds and new projects. She early on noticed his genius, and this was the reason why she had trained him so hard. Enki certainly didn't mind the lessons. However, there was a slight problem. In spirit, Enki was his stepfather's son. For some reason, especially when he grew up, he spent more time in the Sirius Empire than he did in Orion. He particularly spent a lot of time around his stepfather, King Anu. This way he came to know his stepbrother, Enlil, quite well, too. As young adults, they apparently went along fairly well, although they also had their disputes, which could be pretty heated. Enlil was a typical Syrian and as such was quite hot-headed. He was either in a pretty good mood or in a murderous fury. Numerous were the times when the two brothers were fighting, more so in their adolescence, if there is such a thing in Orion. Enki was often the one who calmed Enlil down, and thus their awkward friendship continued well into adulthood. After the Titan War, the mining projects continued. It was business as usual, but the workers soon started protesting again, even louder this time, about long hours in the mines. This infuriated Enlil, and he let his guards and the mining supervisors whip the ones who dared to protest. Lord Enlil even rushed down into the mines at times, talking to the workers in fury. With his reptilian mock-up, his voice was magnified, like if he'd used a bullhorn, he didn't need any. This seemed to help for a while, but the tension down in the mines increased every day, and everybody down there knew it was going to explode soon. Many complained over what a slave driver Enlil was. It even got to a point where they rebelled against their boss and stormed his palace and almost killed him, and the Lord of Command had to hide in his abode in Nippur, Mesopotamia. Those working on the plantations were rebelling, too. Enlil immediately used his powerful crystals to contact his father back in Sirius and told him about the problem and asked to be removed. He wanted to come back home to Sirius and leave Earth for good. Anu got furious when he heard about this problem, because the production came to a halt and they lost income. Both Enlil and Enki were called back home to Sirius, and Nin came with them. Enki had heard about the situation as well, and had thought of a solution that could help his brother with the heavy task of keeping the miners happy. In addition, he could take advantage of the situation and find a reason to accomplish his dreams. He and Ninhursh8G suggested they create a slave race who could do the job for the Syrian miners and hence relieve and discharge them and allow them to return to Sirius again after thousands of years of mining. This idea also forced Enlil to remain on Earth, something he was not thrilled about. So the two siblings traveled back to Earth to see what they could do, having King Anu's consent. Anu also liked the idea of having Enlil away from Sirius, because there was always a chance Enlil would overthrow him and take over the Empire. Enki built a second house in a beautiful, wooden area of Earth, in what was to become his residence in a place called Yridu, and his shrine was Eabzu. Every morning he set his traps to catch wild animals he could eat, something he learned in Sirius. The traps were not of the kind that wounded the animal, but had treats inside a box-like construction, which attracted the victim, and the trap shut down behind it. However, every time Enki came back to get his prey, the traps had been opened and the prey was gone. First he thought it was one of the Syrian workers who had stolen his food because they were hungry, and he complained to Enlil. However, Enlil said that he kept a close eye on his workers after they left the mines late at night. He was afraid of gatherings, which could lead to rebellion, and no worker had ever come close to Enki's house. If this was true, Enki was clueless, so he asked Enlil if he could borrow one of his cameras that he used to monitor the workers, and his brother gave his consent. Enki sat with the camera, well hidden in a tree close to one of the traps, and went home for the evening. The next morning, when he returned as usual, the trap was empty and clearly broken into, which meant that an animal must have been captured and then released by somebody. Enki was excited to find out who had stolen his meal, so he brought the film home to his Eabzu and ran it through his computer. He saw a rabbit swallowing the bait and get caught in the trap. Only a few minutes later, a tall and slender humanoid appeared by the trap. Without looking around, This strange, naked creature, ENKI noticed it was androgynous but was still transmitting feminine energies, bent down, opened the trap, lifted out the animal and took it in her arms and held it as to comfort it. To ENKI's surprise, the rabbit didn't seem scared in the arms of this wondrous humanoid, but calm, and like a mistreated child, it clung to her. It seemed like the humanoid communicated to the rabbit telepathically and gave it a lot of love. Then she set the rabbit down, whereafter it jumped into the woods and disappeared. The humanoid stood up, carefully opened a few branches of the tree in front of her and found the camera. She stared into it, as if she'd never seen one before. Then she turned around and gracefully disappeared back into the woods. The Prince of Orion was surprised. He pushed a couple of buttons on his computer and ran the film again. He was quite fascinated by this unusual being. He had heard about the Namluyu, the ones the Syrians called the Lu, from both his mother and people in Sirius. Now, when he'd seen them in real life, he was mighty impressed, as a geneticist in particular. His mother, the great Queen Nekht, had called them her masterpiece, and now he started to understand what she meant. How on earth do you create a being like that? ENKI's creative and artistic mind began to work, and in his head he calculated how his mother must have put the cells together in a certain structure, and some ideas how it was done came to the young prince's mind. But more than all that, he was very surprised. Where did the Lus come from? He didn't put them there, and when he arrived at Terra, she was dead and barren. The only explanation was that some Lus had survived by fleeing underground before the Great AR hit Terra and split it in two. That made ENKI wonder if there were more creatures who had survived. The truth of the matter was that many Namluyu indeed had escaped underground, assisted by the few titans that survived the impact which destroyed old Terra. When ENKI had restored the flora and the fauna on the planet, the original humans had remained underground. There was nothing for them up there, because the living library was gone, and the Namluyu's task was to guard the living library. However, the titans told them to bide their time. And they were right. Founders of a very high rank had suddenly penetrated the grid, moved through the corridors of time and inserted the living library again. As soon as the Namluyu found out, they left the caverns in droves and went out on the steppes, savannas, and into the forest to herd the new animals. 1. The Titans, however, remained underground. ENKI was very excited, and thought that if he could capture one of these creatures, he could take cell and DNA samples from her and use in his own experiments. But first he needed to study the species in theory, so he looked them up on one of his def to find out more about them. Luckily for him, his mother had trusted him with the information and put it on his After had studied them in detail, a plan started taking form in his head. With time, it became clear for both ENKI and ENLIL that quite a few of the Lus had survived the impact and had come up from underground. They were walking the forests and savannas of Earth, trying to take on their task once again to herd the animals. However, they were shocked when they noticed that the animals on this new world did not act and react the same way as they had done on the old Terra. These animals were of a lower consciousness and ate each other. Many of them ate meat. To the Namluyu, this was unacceptable, and they tried to communicate with them, but they were not as responsive as they used to be, and the tall humanoids did not succeed in changing their behaviors, realizing they were not made to survive on light, grass and plants only. Discouraged, they turned to the herbivorous animals and herded them, protecting them from the meat-eaters. This, of course, was a fruitless project, but herding and guarding the library was what the Namluyu were once designated to do, and although they had all the power to change their destiny, being the interdimensional species they were, their love for nature was immense, and they could no longer communicate back to Orion, thus being stuck with what they had. In fact, when ENLIL had tampered with the electromagnetic field of Terra Nova, it also had changed the behavior of the animals. They had lost their ability to absorb light and use it for food, and were now forced to eat each other. This was the beginning of the end for the gracious Namluyu. 3. Pact between ENKI and ENLIL. The first mining projects were starting in what is today South Africa, later extended to South America, and then to other parts of the world. The Syrians were looking not only for gold, but also other precious metals as usual. There were more planetary bodies in the solar system besides Earth which were hoarding precious metals and minerals, and soon enough the Syrians were digging on other planets in our solar system as well. Up to this day, the Syrians have bases on the Moon, Mars, the moons of Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. There are indications that they even have bases on Venus. It was a hard task for Lord ENLIL to keep the miners in check, not only on Earth, but on the other planetary bodies as well. He hardly got any sleep and worked around the clock to keep workers from revolting. And the more he had to interfere, the more furious he became. The situation was unbearable for everybody involved. ENKI and NIN were working hard in the laboratories in Siberia and in the underground facilities on Mars to create the species his brother could use in the mines. ENKI made a pact with his brother. If they, ENKI and NIN, could create a race of humanoid which were strong enough to work in the mines, they agreed to produce them and give them to ENLIL, on the condition that ENLIL treated them well, and let them just be what they were supposed to be, workers. ENLIL agreed, relieved to hear that his nightmare would perhaps soon be over. ENKI, NIN, and their team of helpers, some of them vegans, tried out prototype after prototype and then abandoned them. NIN was sometimes ruthless with eradicating the prototypes they didn't like or didn't work, and utterly destroyed the bodies, because she didn't want to leave any traces of the failures. ENKI, on the other hand, had a much harder time doing this and worked with precision not to make too many mistakes. Still, it was impossible not to, and he thought to himself that this was the part of the job he liked the least. Some of the prototypes, like the centaur, half man, half horse, was tried out in the mines to carry bags of gold from the caves and up the elevators to the surface, but were discontinued. They tried minotaurs with bulls' heads and human bodies, but they couldn't do the job either. Finally, after an endless amount of experiments, they crossed the genes of that Homo neanderthalensis, possibly with that of the Namluyu and a couple of other star races, but didn't want to use Surian genes, as it would probably insult the overlords. There had been some suggestions that ENKI should use Homo erectus to create the slave worker, but ENKI had just frowned upon it and said that they were way too stupid. He refused to use them in his experiments. The Neanderthals were social, quite smart, and also more spiritual in nature than the erectus. Little did ENKI know at that time that Homo erectus was eventually going to be used to create Homo sapiens too. ENKI and NIN took their prototype to a council meeting and showed the beast to King Anu, who at the moment resided on Mars. There were also other star races in alliance with the Syrians in the solar system at the time, such as races from Draco, Zeta Reticuli, and even some vegans, who had broken up with Orion and allied themselves with the Dark Lords. So there was quite a crowd when the two scientists presented their product. King Anu stepped out of his chair and approached the beast. He squeezed the muscles in the black skin of the beast's arm, checked out the muscles all over the body and looked deep into his eyes. He also noticed to his satisfaction that this prototype was asexual. Then he returned to his seat and sat quiet for a while. Enlil broke the silence, saying he didn't like it. It seemed too smart, and that in combination with its strength that could be devastating. He wanted a race which was easier to handle, not harder. Anu nodded his head. He said he liked the body type. It was perfect for work, both in the mines and on the huge plantations, and to dig for quartz as well. Anu knew that ENKI and NIN needed quartz, lots of quartz, for the artificial wombs they were using when experimenting with genetics. Fortunately, that existed in abundance on Nova Terra. However, Anu continued, I want you to reduce the brain cavity of the beast and make it more stupid. When I looked into its eyes, I noticed intelligence there. Does he have genes from the Lus? If he does, I don't want that. The Lus can aimlessly wander around on the steppes, I don't care, but I sure don't want their consciousness in my workers. ENKI felt quite offended and didn't want to create a stupid race, or they could just as well take the erectus and use them instead, like the vegans had done. Still, he knew he couldn't say that, so he went back to the laboratories in order to manipulate their creation. He and NIN reduced the brain cavity, and the two decided to use some genes of a race from the Draco System 3, who were a reptilian hominid worker species, strong and quite obedient, used to following orders. To accomplish a downgrade like this was nothing extraordinary. It was done all the time when genetically manipulating animals that show too much consciousness. Also, the vegan geneticists did it all the time when they manipulated the apes. They didn't want them to show too much awakening for their taste. NIN, however, had much less respect for the consciousness involved than ENKI had, and she had no problems just killing off inappropriate prototypes. To her, just like to ENLIL as we shall see, killing off experiments was not harder than to step on a bug, apparently. This new prototype was immediately approved by the Surian Council and put on trial. This version was stocky, black-skinned and had big hands. They were made to work 100 beasts were put to labor in the mines to observe how the beast reacted to commands and how well she performed. I say she, because the beast was still androgynous, just like what the Surian overlords wanted. Being asexual made them more docile. It worked out per the plan, and even ENLIL started accepting them, although he was a little reserved for a long time. So, ENKI and NIN used their artificial wombs in their laboratories to create more bodies. An ethical question arose, however, which souls would like to take the bodies of all these workers, who wanted to be a worker in the mines and on the plantations? NIN said that the answer was simple. The planet was surrounded by a grid and was locked in, but there were still discarnate souls hovering around within the planet's atmosphere and had been since the planet was isolated, and these could be used to begin with. ENKI agreed, at least for the moment, because he had other plans as well. 4. Lady of the Lake. All seemed to go well for quite a while, and eventually the Syrian workers in the mines and plantations could be released and were allowed to go home. Left were just the beast, whom ENKI and NIN called the APA. Figure 4-2, NINHURSAG, ENKI, and the Tree of Life. However, one day ENKI traveled to the mines to see how his creation was doing and was shocked to see how badly they were treated. Lord ENLIL had no respect for the APA and drove them to their limits and whipped their black bodies bloody. Many of them died and others were in a terrible shape. ENKI was furious and told ENLIL that this was not what they had agreed upon. Enlil defended himself by saying that he needed to meet his quota and these stupid beasts were supposed to be able to meet them. So if they were too lazy to meet them, he had to make them. Enki threatened to stop producing workers if Enlil didn't change his attitude, but the Lord of Command said that these beings were just animals anyway, so who cares? And King Anu wouldn't be too pleased if the production stopped because Enki didn't want to produce more workers, especially now, when Syrian workers had left Nova Terra. Enki had probably never been this furious in his whole life before and left Enlil's office before he did something he would regret. He returned to his laboratory and sat down to think. His hands were tied. He felt obligated to produce slave workers who would be treated worse than any animal would. I can't say that I understand all the moral aspects of Enki and how his thought process really went. Albeit, I can still speculate from studying the consequences of his decisions. At this exact point in time, one would think he could just pack his bags and go somewhere else, to another planet, and continue his research there, where his oppressive brother didn't have any influence over him, and King Anu couldn't command him. After all, he was Aryan, not Syrian. Was it his marriage with Ninhursag which made him stay? Her being Syrian and wanting to accomplish what her father wanted her to do, and the Enki's apparent affinity for his stepfather, could that have something to do with that he decided to proceed past this point? Figure 4.3. Enki is the creator of life, using the ocean of the Khaa to create soul energy. Note also that he is wearing a headgear with horns, which is typically Syrian. The bigger the horns, the more ranked. This clearly shows that Enki was part of the Syrian project. We can only guess, but Lord Enlil consumed slaves faster than the Enki and Nin could clone them. This was a full-time job for a whole team of scientists, and they still couldn't catch up, because the Enki did not have the equipment to work any faster. So, instead of figuring out how to speed up the cloning process, he realized that the solution must be to let their creation reproduce sexually and introduce polarity onto the scene. Enki returned from Mesopotamia, where he had been working for a while, to the high mountain in Siberia, upon which the sky met the earth and there was this gorgeous, deep, and clear blue saltwater lake. This is where he set up his laboratory, and this time he was alone to begin with. It was time for him to accomplish his dream to create the sexual human being which had the fire of the mother goddess. From the depth of the Khaa, he wanted to insert the special divine fire into the sexual feminine body he wished to create. This place that he'd chosen was not random. Up here was where all the elements met. It was extremely electrical, with constant thunderstorms and incredible lightning bolts penetrating land and water. So one night, when the elements were all loose, Enki stood out in the rain and directed the lightning bolts to hit the lake, one after the other. The electricity was incredible, and when the lake was charged to the maximum, the Aryan master geneticist took samples of the water and took them to his lab. He had huge quantities of quartz available, and his crystals and his nag were there with all the information to guide him, including everything he learned from his mother, the Queen of Orion. Outside, the thunderstorm continued in the same furious manner. And there she was, the Lady of the Lake, the first sexual human female, created by Enki's own DNA, but also that of the Luz, Syrians, Homo neanderthalensis, and a few other star races. But the most important thing of them all, she had the fire of the mother goddess. She was the Eve, the first genetically engineered sexual human female. Lord Enki was very pleased. The Eve was beautiful and dark-skinned, just like her asexual cousins. Excited from his success, Enki continued his work to genetically alter the Eve in order to create a manipulated female by adding lots of testosterone among other things. This manipulated female became the Adamus, the first sexual male. Enki let the two copulate, which failed in the beginning, but after a few adjustments, the two could reproduce and got offspring, and all of them had the fire of the goddess. However, the female bodies, as it were, had generally more spiritual and psychic abilities than the male, which is true even today. Don't we still say that females have better intuition than men? There is truth to that. The first time I heard the story of the Lady of the Lake in the above fashion was on Robert Morningsky's website, but the story is also backed up by the Pleiadians on many accounts. Here they say, your hypothalamus regulates the temperature and water in your body. You are water, you understand, electrified water. The elements and balance of ocean water match the blood in your human body. Humans were made from the ocean. This is one of the greatest secrets of creation. 7. What is this dam? It is all of the ideas, structures, and belief systems that hold the waters of consciousness together. You are made from water, dear friends. 8. And the water in our bodies also is responding to our emotions, so I guess we can assume that via our hypothalamus, we can regulate and control our own emotions. Dan Winter also says in his The Return of Enki, kids became stars. Imagine you are Enki learning from a dragon queen mother, Aid. Here son is how you create life. Take lightning, and learn to tie it up in a ball. Something about that first impulse which turns the skinny tornado like lightning bolt into the Taurus donut. When the whip cracks, implosion starts, it becomes self-reentrant and self-organizing. And PHITLUX, you have life itself. What was a lightning bolt? now appears like a floating ball, really toroidal. Scientists spent lifetimes studying the nature of ball lightning, never imagining that the answer required understanding the origin of life itself as a symmetry turned inside out. 9. This is powerful information, because it's how the fire is made. The fire looks like an orb, and when attaching to a 3D body, she, the feminine orb, stretches herself out to form an avatar, or light body around the physical one. Have you ever wondered what these orbs are that some people managed to catch on film, but were not there before the photo was taken? The lightning of the flash from the camera makes these dancing fires of consciousness visible, if they are present around the photographer. The legend goes that in a position between heaven and earth where the elements can be fully expressed, life can be created. The Pleiadians agree to what we've said here above as well, lightning being the force of the mother goddess. Enki was able to create, discover, and tie molecules together, encoding them with identity, frequency, and electrical charges in order to create life, Earth, P.2, opposite. Thus, Enki had created a fire that did not only come from the universe around him, but was created directly from the womb of the Khaa, the mother goddess. Thus, this fire had divine origins. By separating this fire and mixing the molecules together in a way only a very skilled Kadisu could do, Enki created mind and personality, and all this could be embedded into this new, sexual version of humankind. This fire had the same origin as that of the Enlil, whose genes he also used to create the vessels for this powerful fire. Each fire, stemming from its own oversoul of fire, was then split into many fragments, each one as big and powerful as the other. It was like having a lit torch, and then using it to light up another torch. Once the fire takes on, it's still as powerful as the fire of the first torch. Because of the manner in which Enlil and his Syrian team had locked the planet into 3D and linear time, Enki spread these fire fragments out over the vistas of time, so each fire could have more than one experience. Enki knew that each vessel would die in a certain amount of years and the fire would leave the body and be recycled, but by also being fragmented over a long time period, the oversoul, the real you, would have a greater experience, was Enki's thoughts. This was Enki's experiment, which I want to call Project Elohim, Death from Orion. Only problem was that the oversoul is waiting and waiting, but almost no fragments are reporting back to her, because her fragments are stuck here. It's like having a huge mother fish in one aquarium and putting all its baby fish in another. When the baby fish grow up and die, they can't go back to the mother fish, assuming that was the purpose, because the walls of the aquarium are in the way. Sometimes a fire fragment or two slip through the grid and can return to the oversoul, but it's rare. Most fragments go back into the light, the tunnel, get implanted with amnesia and false memories, and get shot down to Earth in a new body again. Figure 4.4. NINHURSAG and Enki celebrating after have been able to come up with a prototype who could produce offspring. Now, however, during the nanosecond of 1987-2012, we have the chance to heal along the lines of time, like I described in the solution section of Level I, and that will eventually be the end of recycling reincarnation. Once a fire fragment gets it and can escape after body death, the grip of the Syrian overlords can't keep her trapped anymore. She is free to return, and if she has worked on herself spiritually, she can bring the other fragments with her, or let them complete their cycle. Once all soul fragments have reported back to the oversoul, the being is whole again and can continue her journey by doing whatever she wants. This is why it is so important to work on our own spiritual growth and healing, or we'll not be able to complete the cycle at this time. Much more about this in upcoming papers. What Enki apparently didn't think about when he spread out the fire fragments of the oversouls was that the fragments would be stuck here and recycled and not able to reconnect with its higher self, due to the Syrian entrapment. It often seems like Enki was sometimes only thinking in the moment, without first checking out the consequences of his actions. An explanation to why this happened could be because here on Earth it was harder to reach out across the dimensions, like both Aryans and Syrians were used to do, this being due to the heavy density Earth was embedded into, and even the gods were trapped here due to Enlil's grid and the closing down of the stargates. But with a little effort he could have done it and seen that his creation was bound to go through a whole lot of suffering on many levels before they could set themselves free, if ever. Eventually, he seems to have realized this, but then it was too little, too late. His solution to this problem, as we shall see later, was not that brilliant either, and some would say it only made matters worse. 5. Integrating Project Elohim with earlier experiments. Enki's new creation was met with much skepticism and critique from the Syrian overlords. They understood the dilemma with cloning, and if it had to be done in such a speed, each generation of clone APA would be an inferior copy of the one before and the whole species would deteriorate with time, making weaker workers. No one seemed to question Enlil's way of treating Enki's creation, however, and very little consideration was put into the fact that NIN and Enki had to work themselves to total exhaustion to the brink of burning out in order to catch up with Lord Enlil's quick consumption of human prototypes. Enlil, of course, did not like the idea of a sexual human for many reasons. He didn't want them to be distracted by sexual needs, and he didn't like that they had been allowed to be introduced to the tree of life and the secrets of the gods. It was alarming and shouldn't be allowed. These beings were supposedly made to be workers' slaves, and nothing more. Now they had been allowed to taste the elixir of the gods. Enlil burst out, "I truly hope you didn't give them our longevity too." In fact, Enki hadn't. He knew that it was not going to be accepted, and he told the council that ADAMUS would be short-lived. Still, old scriptures tell us that some humans lived for more than 1,000 years, but 1,000 years was still the blink of an eye from the gods' perspective. Besides, some of the humans, like Abraham and other Enlil's patriarchs, needed their longer lifespan to be able to play out the role they had been assigned by the gods. To Enlil's dismay, the new species which they called the Lulu, the mixed being, among the star races, was accepted. It was a sarcastic, and quite a humiliating term, classifying them in the same category as low-conscious animals. There was one crux, however: they were again too clever, and Enlil wanted their intelligence reduced. This time, for some reason, the council voted against Enlil, who in his fury said that at least the copulation had to be supervised, and it must be supervised by him, Lord Enlil himself. And males and females needed to be separated so they didn't go berserk on each other. On these 2 points, the council agreed. Enlil calmed down a little. Enki had mixed feelings. He didn't like to be supervised by his oppressive brother. Project Elohim was his experiment, and his brother knew next to nothing about cloning. But Enki did not dare to speak up, afraid to lose the little influence he had. So Enlil was still put in charge of the mining process, and Enki was in charge of the plantations, making sure the wheat and important herbs and vegetables were being produced. At daytime, the males and females had to be separated from each other on the field, and Enki was sure they were separated in the mines as well. He knew pretty well how Enlil would treat them there, where Enki couldn't supervise the situation, and this aggravated him, but he still decided to continue the experiment here on Earth, in spite of the suffering his creation had to go through. At times, an excited Enlil showed up on the plains with a line of chained Lulus, whom he thought were standing out by being strong, obedient and just intelligent enough to understand his every command. In other words, from Enlil's viewpoint, a lesser intelligent Lulu was a better Lulu. He wanted them to reproduce so he could get a strong and obedient offspring for the mines. Enki put the chosen ones together in a cave, 2 by 2, under his brother's supervision. Enlil told him who was going to mate with whom, and there, in the caves, offspring were made. Lord Enlil was not the chief administrator of Terra Nova when the Titans were gone, and was also in charge of all projects that were going on by Syrians, except Project Elohim, which Enki had managed to talk himself into remaining in charge of, although Enlil had the last word when deciding who was allowed to reproduce. Enlil stayed at the plantations for quite a while, long enough to think it was appropriate to build a big cabin on one of the hills, from where he could overlook the production down in the valley. The sun was extremely hot and the plantations had to be watered constantly by a sprinkler system, which also kept the workers relatively cool. Under Enki's supervision, they were handed food 3 times a day, but now when Lord Enlil came visiting, that changed. The workers were fed once a day, which was in the evenings, and they all had to beg for it. 6. Again, this created a lot of bad blood between the brothers, and Enki didn't talk much to Enlil while he was at the plantations, at which he sometimes could stay for extended periods of time, something that annoyed Enki. As soon as his oppressive brother left, however, Enki let the males and females join together and copulate in the evenings in the garden, across the plantations. This was their only pleasure, which they appreciated to the fullest, and which also made them work harder during the days, only because they were happier, and appreciated of their master. The first thing Enlil noticed was the increase in production, and for a while he thought that maybe he had been wrong, and that sexual beings actually work harder, but on the other hand, he was not going to let Enki take credit for that, so he told Enki that he needed the production to go up even more. The demand was great, he said. Enki was not stupid, he knew what went on in his brother's mind, but he couldn't do anything about it as long as Enlil was in charge. However, he still let the Lulus reproduce freely in the garden. But Enlil started getting suspicious, because Enki had way too many workers in the plantations. Many of them were asexual, but something was not right. Quite a few of them acted differently, although they apparently tried to hide it. They were more intelligent and aware. When he realized what Enki had done, he ran into his brother's office and started screaming and shouting and accusing him of breaking their agreement, and worse. Enki countered by yelling back, saying Enlil treated his creation worse than any animal, whipping them, screaming at them, hunting them down when they tried to hide, torturing them, killing them, and even eating them. Enlil said it's nothing wrong with that. After all, they're only Lulus and as such dispensable. The whole outbreak ended in a fistfight, and the two had to be separated. When Enlil calmed down enough not to attack his brother, and with 4 strong reptilian guards holding him back, he wheezed between his teeth, while catching his breath. I want all these filthy Lulus of yours out of the garden NOW. The garden will from now on belong to those paying allegiance to me and who follow my commands. You can take your misfits and let them free in the woods. I hope they'll get killed by tigers and bears. I from here on declare the Garden of Eden my property. Enki gathered his creation, those who were willing to follow their creator, and took off into the forest. There were still quite a few sexual humans who were too afraid to follow Enki. However, Lord Enlil had scared them until they shook of fear from what most certainly would happen if they went into the wide open forest without the supervision of an army. He said it was extremely dangerous out there, with horrible monsters, demons, and man-eaters behind every other tree. They wouldn't survive a day out there. So, out of fear, many Lulus stayed with Enlil and became his obedient property. This was probably the time when most Syrians, and Enki as well, took on human bodies to blend in with the human population, although it seems like the bodies they created for themselves were taller, and perhaps even stronger than the ones used in the slave camps. We still see some reptilian artifact from more recent times, and the reason for that could be that not all of the gods changed body types, or only did so when the old one stopped working properly. Some of the statues and statuettes we see can also be depictions of Syrians and other star races manifesting in their avatars. It's hard to say. 6. The Tree of Knowledge and the Tree of Life. Enki, on the other hand, decided to educate the smartest of the Lulus and teach them about their own history, the history of the gods and how they came to be. In other words, he gave them quite a lot from the Tree of Knowledge. However, he didn't teach everybody, and he didn't teach them everything. Not even Enki wanted the humans to become like the gods. He only wanted them to give them the taste and perhaps the ability to eventually set themselves free. He spent a lot of time with his creation, to observe and teach them. He taught them how to create fire in the woods at night to keep wild animals away. He taught them which plants to eat, and how to hunt. He even taught them to draw, an art they used to create cave paintings and paintings on stones. Enki taught them basic survival skills, but the most intelligent of the Lulus he took aside and spent extra time with, teaching them more esoteric knowledge about astronomy, astrology, where the gods came from, etc. This knowledge was kept secret within a secret society called the Sisterhood of the Snake, and then there was another, the Brotherhood of the Snake, which consisted of only males, whose purpose was to protect the females and their wisdom. So, the Lulus he took aside to teach what later became shamanism were almost exclusively women, because Enki, being an Aryan, knew about the divine feminine, and although he supported his father, the Syrian king Anu, in many ways, he still had love for his mother, the queen, and respect for the power of the divine feminine. So he taught these special women the art and religion of shamanism, the religion of the mother goddess, and let them learn how to practice it. To his excitement, Enki noticed that he had done a very good job over there at the lake on top of the Siberian mountain, because these human women were extremely powerful and could quite easily be taught how to connect with the 96%, the KHAA. Although, to a certain degree it concerned him, because if the Syrians happened to find out, they would definitely want to suck in that power. He knew his Syrian friends too well, so this was reason enough to keep even most of his own special creation ignorant. Therefore, Enki selected out his own best shamans and let them practice, and when other women showed talent enough in the matter, he sometimes taught them, too. But he didn't want too many to know the secrets of the gods. The Bible says that Adam and Eve ate the fruits from the tree of knowledge and the tree of life, and this was related to the original sin. Well, there is no original sin, except in the eyes of some gods, like Enlilhvh Jehovah and his clan, who wanted to keep mankind ignorant and afraid that they would become like the gods. If that's our original sin, mankind is guilty as charged. However, in terms of the universe, it's called evolution. The tree of knowledge is the wisdom of learning about sexuality. The true tree of knowledge does not only teach you how to be intimate with a partner in general, that's something a sexual being can find out by themselves. The tree of knowledge has to do with sex magic and how to connect with the KHAA through the female orgasm and close intimacy between partners who love each other, like we talked about already in the first paper in Level 2. This was learned in the beginning of time through shamanism, which is a religion originating in Belt of Orion, and which Enki knew about. So he initiated some of the females into these sacred rituals. This way, if each tribe had a shaman or two, these gifted women of fire could become multidimensional while still anchored and grounded in their bodies. If the tribe needed to know the outcome of some important decisions, or the solution to certain problems, the women of fire split and extended their fire across the dimensions by engaging themselves and the tribes in ecstatic dance and sacred sex to find the best possible outcome for the survival of the tribe. The best of them were very successful and considered crucial for the tribe and its survival. The men of the tribes protected the women of fire with their lives. The tree of life had to do with the longevity of the gods. This was another knowledge Enlil and most Syrians did not want the Lulus to know about. It had to do with blood, the life elixir of the goddess, the SMA. Again, the Pleiadians explain it best in one of their book, and I quote, "In this version of creation, woman sprang from a man. This is not so. It is always the goddess who knows the scoop on making life, because it is the goddess who carries the blood." The Bible relates the story of the tree of life and the tree of knowledge. The tree of knowledge allows you to be informed. Sexual ability and practice equate to the tree of knowledge, the tree that humans were forbidden to eat from. They were forbidden to participate as well with the tree of life. What is the tree of life? Many think that the tree of life is something that grows a fruit. It is rumored that through ingesting this fruit of the tree of life you can gain immortality. In ancient times it was understood that this fruit was the blood of the goddess. That was the fruit of the tree of life. Think of your body and your nervous system as a tree. The stories are not talking about fruits on trees, but to the fruits of the body, the secretions and substances that are indeed gifts of the gods. For eons, the gods have been steering you away from this knowledge. To have sex with a woman when she is on her blood time is one of the highest vibrations because you go through doorways into other realms. To share the blood is to take on the higher consciousness. 9. Indeed, blood is one of the keys to longevity, menstrual blood of the goddess, SMA, in combination with monatomic gold. This is how the gods did it, and still do. Here on Earth, we also have access to the blood of the goddess through women's menses. The fire of the divine feminine still flows through her bloodstream today, more so than it does men, because the female came first, and men are just altered females, i.e., they were made out of females, not the other way around, like we have learned from distorted religions. If a male has a true, loving relationship with a female and they have sex during her menstruation, and they know how to enjoy magic sex through the female orgasm in the shamanic ways, and the female is willing to share, the experience not only takes them to the 96%, but the experience is enhanced by the menses, and so is the longevity of the parties. One of the most powerful gifts a woman can give to her man is for him to drink from her menstruation blood, because it may prolong his life, enhance his energy level and make it easier for him to connect to the world beyond, /space/time. The blood was the elixir of the gods, and legend goes how the gods killed the shamanic priestesses, drank their blood and ate their major organs and glands to get the personality of the shaman and thus understand the knowledge these shamanic women held. This did not only happen on Earth, there was an old war between the gender which had taken place in this sector of the universe where polarity and free will runs, so as usual, the ways of the gods were just brought down here. 12. For hundreds, or thousands of years, we have been taught that women's menses are dirty, and you shouldn't have sex when she's having her period. Now it's easy to see how they have managed to manipulate us into thinking that we better stay away from sex while our partner is having her period, when in fact this would be the best time to engage in that, except if you are planning on having children, of course. Also, the women's periods are the perfect time to have unprotected sex for those who prefer that. It's the nature's way of saying, now you can have sex without being pregnant. Want to be pregnant? Then have sex when you're fertile. In ancient days, they didn't have condoms or pills to prevent pregnancy, but when they had the right knowledge, they knew when to have sex and when not to, depending on the woman's cycle. After had engaged in teaching the most brilliant of the Lulus about most of these things, Enki made them teachers who taught others whom they thought were worthy of the knowledge of the gods. The rest still remained in ignorance to a large degree, so whether it was Enki's intention or not, this was the beginning of the creation of elitism. Enki indeed bred bloodlines which were, for more than others, who could understand the secrets, and later on, he sat them to rule over mankind. They became whom we today call the global elite, the Illuminati, the International Banking Cartel, the Bilderbergers, the Trilateral Commission, and so on. 7. The departure of a divine species. One day, when Lord Enlil had a meeting with the Syrian council outside his domain in Mesopotamia, they got visitors. All of a sudden, out of the forest came a large group of Namluyu. They stopped just a few feet away from the Syrians, who were seated in Enlil's gorgeous garden. The Syrians stood up in their chairs, feeling threatened at first, and the guards drew their weapons. It was a very curious event. Enlil took command over the situation and asked the newcomers, "What do you want? Who is your leader?" The answer came telepathically, but it didn't seem to come from one being, but from all of them simultaneously. The message was, "We have no leader. We are all leaders and don't need a hierarchy. We are here to tell you that we are leaving." Enlil looked at them, like if he'd heard them wrong. "Leaving? Where?" The group of humanoids replied, "We are leaving this dimension. We are protesting what is happening here on this planet, which belongs to the Queen of the Stars and which you have hijacked and changed to your own liking. However, your liking is not compatible with ours. The wonderful animals we used to herd and guard have become nothing but beasts who eat the flesh of each other, just like you eat the flesh and drink the blood of your own creation. Furthermore, you trap and eat defenseless animals, and you have made our cousins into slaves down in the mines and on the plantations and lowered the frequency to such a degree that it is hard for us to stay here even if we wanted to. You are changing and interfering with what once was set into motion for a purpose that goes beyond your limited comprehension. Don't you see that there is consciousness involved here, and you think you are for more than the species you create and master? Your food source is fear and terror, which you induce in others. But after all, who is living in most fear, the slave driver or the slave? If you are masters of your reality, why then do you need to seal off this planet and hide in a density where few may be able to find you? Whom do you fear? We have seen your intentions and we know your journey, lords of Sirius. We grieve what you have done to Mother Terra, and we grieve what you will do in the future, and to the life you have helped creating. Still, we are not here to judge you. We are solely trying to make you see your own dilemma. For a dilemma it is, one that will be harder and harder to resolve the longer you wait. The Namlu you have spoken. We are leaving, but are first informing you of our departure. There is nothing here for us anymore, and we will go to where our service is still needed and valued. We have also seen that you are planning on using our consciousness in your experiment, and in that we refuse to participate. We are of the goddess, and we are speaking as one. Enlil shook his head. What were they talking about? However, the next moment the whole group was gone, like they had disappeared into thin air. Within the next few months, departed Namlu bodies could be found everywhere around the planet. They had simply laid down in groups, and their consciousness had left their bodies at will. The Syrians noticed that they had also managed to escape through the grid. This frustrated Enlil to the maximum, and after that, the DNA of the Lulus were rearranged so the soul could not leave the body at will. Enki was told to chain the soul to the body with a cord, which made it much harder for consciousness to permanently escape their physical vessel, unless the body was really dead. 10. Figure 4-5. Lord Enki creating Eve, but still with his hands and feet figuratively tied, not allowed to proceed with Project Elohim the way he wanted. In the background, to the right, we see the oppressive Enlil manipulating the project in his usual dictatorial manner. For those who understood, the loss of the Namlu was tremendous. These divine, magnificent beings, who used to be the guardians of the living library, the keepers of the code, and the masters of frequency, light and love, were no more to be found in this dimension, and since that time, they have never returned. 11. Few were those who understood the significance of their presence on the planet. After they left, the real decline started on a global scale. The only ones left on Mother Earth to help her keep the worst frequencies of fear and terror under control were now the whales and the dolphins. Without them, our planet would most probably not have existed for long after the Namlu disappeared. And now, in today's world, whales are hunted down to extinction, and dolphins mysteriously washed up on the shores in groups, and they are all dead. Are they too, just like the Namlu did in the past, leaving our dimension in droves for the same reason the primordial humans did? Or are the dead dolphins just giving the final warning to a world that still doesn't know how to see and listen, while its most intelligent species continuously misuse energy? Overall, the Syrians were pleased, however, because Enki had helped them create a species which was a mix of Luz, Syrians, Aryans, vegans, and the domestic apes, and thus changed the Queen's original experiment to such a degree that it had become a totally new species that they now felt that they owned. The Aryans could not come and claim the humans anymore, especially now when the Namlu were gone. 8. The Cain-enabled bloodlines. We have all heard about the Bible story of Cain slaughtering Abel and thus got blood on his hands, a crime his descendants had to carry. Also, there have been plenty of explanations as of how this happened and its consequences. Were Cain and Abel real persons, or did they symbolize something else? In this case, I would prefer to look at it from a different angle than what people are used to. From what I can see, Cain and Abel are just personifications of something much bigger. They are simply two different genetic experiments. The Abel experiment was that of the enhanced Homo neanderthalensis, the spiritual human. This was the prototype Enki and Nin used, both when they created the asexual workers and later, the sexual beings, who were meant to become Homo sapiens, the experiment which was supposed to run well into the future, although it didn't turn out that way in the end. The upgraded version of the Neanderthalensis were quite smart, actually too smart for the Syrian Council. The vegans, who had been here while Enki was gone after the ecosystem on Earth was re-established, did some genetic engineering here, because it was allowed then, and hence created both the Neanderthalensis and Homo erectus. This is why we can find these two species walking the Earth at the same time. They both had vegan genes in them. Other founders, Katistu from Orion, were also here for a while and continued enhancing the Neanderthals, but both projects were abandoned when Enki's team came back. Then after Enki took what was already there and used the Neanderthalensis, because he found the Erectus being too stupid, it eventually ended with that the Syrian Council took Enlil's complaint seriously, and ordered Enki to discontinue the Neanderthalensis bloodline, the Abel line, and instead concentrate on Homo erectus. Reluctantly, Enki did what the council had decided, but he enhanced its cranium cavity to make it as intelligent as possible, and still added Namlu genes together with his own, and that of Ninhursh Syrian DNA. Then, of course, there was still vegan DNA in the body since much earlier, and in addition to that, genes from other star races they used when creating the original Homo erectus. The Homo erectus line would equal the Cain line, which eventually became Homo sapiens, the version which is us today. However, up until about 28,000 years ago, both the Abel and Cain line existed side by side, although Enki was not upgrading the Abel line anymore. This is of course the simple version, and a more complex version can be read in Anton Park's The Chronicles of the Gear Clue, and in the English synopsis, which can be found here. http://www.zyklon.net/enchantment/ag3.html creating humans, and a well-drawn diagram can be found here. http://www.zyklon.net/enchantment/images/mangan5e.jpg. Click on the diagram to enlarge. Enki had saved his sexual creation, but it had been a close call. He had managed to justify their existence before the Syrian Council and King Anu himself, but they had to be handled under restriction. Enlil, furious, had thrown the sexual humans out of the garden, but still used them for labor. They were just not welcomed in the garden to rest after work unless they kept to Lord Enlil's very strict laws and regulations, which all boiled down to that they had to follow any order they got, even if it led to their own demise. The alternative was a certain death in the wilderness. Out of fear, many early humans accepted Enlil's offer. The rest went with Enki. However, there was a point in time when Enlil realized that it would be beneficial if his creation knew some basic survival skills as well, so Enki and his brother made an agreement that it was okay to teach all humans how to make fire, cook their own food, plant their own gardens, and mate for life instead of just creating babies to be used for slave labor as soon as they were strong enough. Still, the parents were on duty from early morning until late at night and were only allowed to see their offspring when they woke up and before they went to bed in the evening. During the day, the babies and children were taken care of, being put in a nursery, where they were well fed to grow up to become strong workers. Once it was time to put them to work, they were fed much less. At night, the parents often came back, bloody from their bodies having tasted Enlil's infamous whips, and totally exhausted. This was the life of the human slave worker. At least Enlil's workforce got a break on occasion when they were taught basic skills, something they always looked forward to. Enki's followers, however, were taught something Enlil's slaves were never even hinted at: the power of shamanism. In the beginning, Enki had them build small communities with cabins close to running water where there was an abundance of food stuff, and the tribe thrived and learned a lot from their teacher. They still had to work hard, but these tribes, who consisted both of enhanced Neanderthalensis and Homo erectus, were mostly working for themselves and their own communities. In the middle of each community was one or more shamanic women, who knew how to connect their fire with the 96%, which became the most important part of each group. Then, the shamans, who sometimes also could be males, taught others whom they saw had the drive and urge to become shamans themselves. So, these early humans, who followed the ways of Enki, also followed the old ways of shamanism and the religion of the mother goddess and the divine feminine. In the midst of every tribe was a female, and there were those she had selected to become initiate in the Sisterhood of the Snake, which was a closed society. The creation of such was indeed a sore thumb that stood out in a group which otherwise was doing excellent under the circumstances. By having an elite group amongst the rest of the people, who were not allowed to take part of what was taught in this secret society, was indeed the beginning of an unfortunate elitism which would ripple out through the lines of time. This is how it started, and with time it became more and more ego-centered, and offshoots to this society were eventually created by those who wanted to know, but were not allowed access to the inner secrets, and therefore stole information from the original society, then using it as a secret to create their own sisterhoods and brotherhoods, which became more and more corrupt as time went by. Enki could have foreseen this, but his idea was that humans are stupid, except for a selected few, who are smart enough to learn some of the secrets of their own history and that of the universe. Much later on, Enki and those who wanted to follow him, some were content and wanted to stay where they were, migrated westward and settled down on a big continent in the west, which at that time was located between Europe and the American East Coast. This continent, which no longer exists in our reality, has best been remembered under the name of Atlantis. Here, Enki was the king, although he let female shamans run their tribes, having their own sovereignty, but Enki was the coordinator and ultimate authority, more so with time than he was to begin with. In Atlantis, he became known in future history as Poseidon in Greece and Neptune in Rome. The Enki and shamanic tribes that moved to Mu, whom I will simply call the Lemurians, were practicing the religion of the mother goddess and did so in relative peace. They knew better than interfering with neither the Nlilites, the Ram clan, nor the Nkides, the Serpent clan, and the petty wars that were eventually going to be played out on the planet between the two groups. The Lemurians were a mix of Project Elohim, the upgraded Homo neanderthalensis, and Project Erectus, the upgraded Homo erectus, none of them being today's Homo sapiens, who were actually not created until after the deluge, contrary to what many researchers believe. However, Project Erectus is the direct ancestors of today's humans. They looked the same, but were taller, while Project Elohim were shorter, more intelligent, and naturally more spiritually inclined. Although the first humans, both of Project Elohim and Erectus, were dark-skinned long before Lemurian times, both white-skinned and black-skinned humans existed from both projects. 14. So, before we continue following the NKI's and the NLIL's escapades, we are going to see what the NKI and shamans who moved eastwards created in Mu. We are also going to see what happened when they suddenly were visited both by benevolent and malevolent giants of impressive stature, some of them building the huge stone monuments from which there are still ruins, both on the Easter Islands, in Polynesia, Hawaii, and elsewhere. But first, before we even go into that story, we need to look into who Lord NKI really was a little closer, and what his true intentions were. How benevolent was this being, really?